Okay, so good evening. My name is Tom Flynn, and I'm a resident of Ridgewood for 22 years, since the year 2000, like Pam. I am an insurance agent with State Farm, which has nothing to do with tonight, but I just thought I'd throw that out there. And we have, the issue of zoning comes up, and we had some pretty big issues in terms of zoning in the last, I guess, 5-6 years in Ridgewood in terms of multifamily and whatnot. So it's an issue that does come up, it seems to come up in waves, but so we brought 3 professionals here tonight to discuss zoning related issues, and I'm going to start with a little quick bio for everyone here. One of our panelists tonight is Simone Sigonis. Did I say that correctly? Okay. She's in leadership in energy and environmental design accredited professional. She's a certified interior designer and a member of the National Council of Architectural Registration Boards. She's also a licensed real estate salesperson, and she also served 3 terms, I think, on the Cresco Council. And she's also involved with the admissions department of MIT. Is that correct? Okay.
Very cool.
My next guest is panelist is Pam Schmiel. She's a licensed realtor and a top producing real estate agent on the GUB team, resident of Ridgewood since 2000. Her current niche is supporting older residents who are selling their homes and transitioning to long-term care, independent living. She previously spent years with Merrill Lynch on the mortgage trading desk and was director of marketing and PR at Bloomberg. And last but not least is William J. Martin, is an award-winning architect, professional planner focused on sustainable, high-performance, resilient, and energy-efficient design configurations using cultural vernacular expression. Mr. Martin has been on, Bill has been interviewed on CNBC, Fox News, MSNBC, and other news outlets. So, so anyway, I was going to throw out there the question of the issue. One of the issues that comes up is the issue of home rule. And I have a series of questions. I know we went over this briefly, but does someone want to just talk about that briefly, the idea of home rule?
You looking at me?
Well, yes.
Well, you're talking about home rule and land use.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. Excuse me, yes.
Home rule and land use starts at the state level. The state has all the power and all the authority. Governor and the legislature, through the Constitution. You want me to shout?
Yeah.
Okay. But that authority can be delegated to local municipalities. So it's delegated, and that's why we have mayors and councils for our municipalities. And through that process of delegation, we develop home rule. So we vote for our local officials. Our local officials get elected. They appoint zoning boards and planning boards that help to manage land use issues on a local level, where they are immediately aware of any issues that are arising so they can be addressed. So that's essentially home rule as you would define it for land use, at least in my opinion. Simone might have some more about that.
No, I would agree with that. I think what it is that the state legislature in New Jersey, through the New Jersey Constitution, gave the authority to the municipalities to be able to delegate their own zoning and planning regulations. And this is done, just as Bill described, through the correspondence with the governing body who appoints the officials to these boards. And we have to remember that, and we have, I don't remember how many hundreds of municipalities we have in this state, but as architects, there was always some sort of push. Is there any way to do some sort of uniformed zoning? Because we even have the national, the BOCA, the International Building Code. But it's always been very difficult because of this home rule. Everybody wants to have their own regulations based on their own context. And in a way, it's been working for us here in New Jersey. So I don't think we'll ever deviate from home rule, not in this state.
One of the things that comes up, and I think I get the difference myself, but I don't know if you do. The difference, zoning, a planning board versus a zoning board, I guess they sometimes call it a board of adjustment.
It's a zoning board of adjustment.
Okay. So what's the difference between the two, like in terms of land use? Like, the two different boards. that you have to go to. Does
Yeah,
anyone want to
I
discuss?
serve on both boards, but
Okay.
I know
Yes,
Simone has experience with the planning
I
boards.
know, I actually just looked this up earlier, and I thought this was a really easy way of understanding the definition. There's a 7-step test that will help determine whether your application is going to go before the planning board or the zoning board. So one step is, does it involve a use that's not permitted in the zone? The second one is, does it involve a principal structure not permitted in the zone? The third is, does it involve an expansion of a non-conforming use? The fourth is, does it involve a deviation from a standard pertaining solely to a conditional use? The fifth is, does it involve an increase in permitted floor area ratio, which we'll talk about later? The next is, does it involve an increase in permitted density? And the final is, does it involve a height change which exceeds 10 feet or 10% of the maximum height? If there's a yes to any of those above test questions, then zoning board has jurisdiction. And just as a little aside, if not, if the application involves a subdivision, site plan, or a conditional use that's not a deviation from what I mentioned before, which is certain variances in bulk and setbacks, then it goes before planning board. So I think zoning board gets to hear a lot more applications than planning board does, but I simply like to say that if it's use, it's zoning. If it's site plan or subdivision, it's planning. Just very simplistically put.
That's pretty much it. The planning board deals with uses that are permitted in the zone. The planning board does have the authority to grant variances, but only dimensional type variances within limitations, as Simone said. The planning board has among its members a member of the governing body and a member and the mayor. And the reason why is that through permitted uses, the mayor and governing body guide the economic development of the municipality through the planning board. The zoning board, on the other hand, they're all members that are appointed by the governing body, but there are no elected officials on the zoning board. Part of the reason for that is that when there's a use involved, a use that changes on a piece of property, that can greatly affect the value of that property. So the legislature, when they drafted the New Jersey Municipal Land Use Law and created and delegated the authority to create planning and zoning boards in New Jersey, they felt that they did not want elected officials making decisions that could greatly affect the value of property. So that was never, that's why the zoning board is members, residents of the town that are appointed by the mayor and governing body to serve in that capacity to assess changes of use, which is why they call it the Zoning Board of Adjustment, because it's adjusting to the circumstances that may have changed since the zoning was drafted. But they wanted a certain independence of that group so that their decision-making process would not be affected by political reasoning, which can invade sometimes the meetings. But the planning board and the economic development of the municipality, it's entirely appropriate to have elected officials on there because they're elected to do those things. The other thing, and Simone said that the zoning boards seem to have more action than the planning boards, and that's not true everywhere in New Jersey. But in the northern part of New Jersey, especially in Bergen County, where we are developed to a high degree, most of the actions are at the zoning board because very often, whatever proposals come out, there will be some type of a variance that is needed that will trigger a zoning board review rather than a planning board review. So that's why you see, here in Bergen County, you see a lot more action at the zoning boards and not at the planning boards. Now, some municipalities have combined their boards, have combined the planning and zoning, and the zoning functions of the board cannot be, the mayor and council member cannot participate in that part of the proceeding. But I have found in appearing at planning and zoning boards all throughout the state, it's very confusing for the public to understand, why is the mayor not participating in this change of use application? Why is my council person not participating in this change of use application? This is important stuff. It's better, in my view, to keep them separated, even if the land use law allows you to combine them together. That's just my opinion.
So I have a question, because we were talking before, Pam, about just the shortage, right? The demand is greater than the supply, at least right now, to live in places like Ridgewood. And are you getting questions like, because in some place, the issue of, could we build somebody put down, a tiny house? What can we do as far as expansion? Can we make it a two-family? My mother wants to live here, my grandmother, et cetera. I mean, are you getting, just given the fact that there's a shortage?
There is a shortage. We have the need for extended family, and normally they're looking for, housing that they can change, which we don't have now, and I don't think we will. Because, from what I understand, I don't think Ridgewood and the surrounding areas, I think most of the towns are the same, we're not going to get any kind of new ADU rules because, unlike, the old, and you guys would know more on that, or why and how we had certain parts of Ridgewood, you'll see we have certain parts of Ridgewood that are multifamily zoned, so you are zoned for a certain area, and those are from, I don't even know how many years back. And most of that won't change. So if I'm in an R1, am I saying the right ones? If I'm in the residential area right around here, most likely none of us are building a multifamily here. But there is a need, and what people really want is a home that they can change a walkout basement to a bedroom, kitchen, etc. to over the old carriage houses we used to have, up in the old country club area that were grandfathered for years until they kind of went away.
But that's not allowed now, so you can't.
But that's not allowed because, and from what I understand from doing my research, to make it more multifamily versus an ADU situation, accessible dwelling situation. You cannot discriminate. So if all of us wanted to do it, we could. So then we'd end up with an entire town with multifamily homes. And really, when it comes down to it, it affects our taxes, our schools,
Right.
and things that they can't, do, like they can do, the high density housing, because really what we have downtown is high density. It's not multifamily. Our multifamilies are ones that are scattered throughout, but are more like 2 to 4 families.
Is that what is a multifamily becomes when they're talking about two families?
It's really it's multi residences in one structure, but it's really geared toward created the term was created for 2 to 4 family, and then what we've built as far as apartments and condos and places like that are high density living situations.
Does the issue of I know people do, because I know we go and we do these. My family and I, not Airbnbs, or what's the other one? RBO, VRBOs. What is the situation as far as that goes? I mean, does anybody have any input on that? Not necessarily in Ridgewood, but just in general.
What we did in Cresthill on the planning board, when I was sitting on the council, is we found a lot of homes up on the hill were renting their owners were renting their houses out for weekend parties. And it was becoming a big concern to the neighbors. A lot of complaints, cops would come, damage was done. So they came to the mayor and council. They says, what can you do to really keep people from renting their homes out for the weekend? So through the mayor and council, you can create ordinances to try to limit that type of activity, mainly because it's very transient and people are worried about strangers coming in, and it's allowable because of the negative repercussions that renting a house can have. As far as Airbnb, I don't think anybody's ever really explored that in our town, but I know we've had the issues of just renting. So we passed an ordinance which if you are an owner, you cannot rent for less than 6 months to try to keep the that transiency at a minimum.
When does this?
There's another side to that too. I do understand why municipalities would want to do that, But my hope is that as these internet-based home rental entities evolve, they'll be able to control that party house kind of thing, because I see great benefits to especially seniors to be able to rent their home for a short-term purpose, maybe for a businessman who's visiting one of our corporate parks. Rather than going to a hotel, they might want to be there for a week or so. They want to live out of a hotel. They want to live in a house. And a senior could possibly, rent their house short term, be out for a week, and then come back. If you have family nearby, it gives them the possibility of having an additional income stream. So I know a lot of municipalities want to restrict that, but I just think that as the platform evolves, it could grow into a situation where there's more of a benefit to the community than a detriment.
I totally agree. The only thing is it has to come with, I know because they do this in Greece and a lot, but it's very, very highly regulated. Each house is inspected. The house has to come with clean linens, clean this, clean that. It's I just can't imagine our fire departments and police departments and health departments and everybody's going to be involved in this. So it's going to be something that really, it's a wonderful idea, like you said, to help our community, but it's going to come with really strict regulations that need to be
I guess it just depends on, because the way these services are set up, the person renting the facility and the person who owns the facility, they get to rate each other. So there's a kind of there's a self-correcting mechanism here. If someone rents a house and has a destructive party, they're going to be barred from ever renting on the platform again. So there's a self-regulating aspect to this that I don't think has fully evolved yet, but I can see it evolving to a point where it could truly be a benefit to the community as well as the homeowners, especially seniors who are looking for a little bit of additional income. So I'm trying to keep an open mind about that. I think that...
I don't think ours is ever going to change, unfortunately. we got hit hard when they made the change here.
Well, my concern is this, that, we have new innovative ideas, and that if government moves too quickly to kibosh those ideas and they don't get a chance to fully evolve, I think we're losing out on something. So I would caution that, not be so closed-minded, and not that you're closed-minded. I'm just saying, I think generally speaking that government and the regulators that are looking at these things need to look at the benefits as well as the detriments. And if we can control the negative aspects of it, and some of that is self-policing from the platforms themselves, and have some reasonable regulation on it, I think that it could be very beneficial to communities, everyone.
Right. I think the image that people probably get is, oh God, there's the renters and here come the beer cans into my backyard because my neighbor's renting his house. Right. I think that's probably
I completely understand that. But that's
hey, Bill, your renters, tell them to leave the whiskey in your house,
But what's sad is it limits us just as, me renting to Stacy. Like for in the real estate world, we have so many of our, family and friends that are upgrading and doing work on their homes, and they just need to be out 2 months, 3 months. And they can't, it's very hard to stay in Ridgewood because it's hard to find a really short-term rental at one of the apartment buildings or find someone that can rent, and they would like to just find a place that they can keep their kids in school, not worry about, driving, going to their moms and wherever and driving their kids back and forth.
When does a house become, like, I know one of the questions that was a granny flat, but I mean, when I was a kid, where I grew up, a lot of people had the basement, they'd live in the basement. I remember my grandmother and her sister, they would cook in the basement because nobody had air conditioning, right? They were born 1,000 years ago. So nobody had air conditioning. So they'd spend the summer in the basement pretty much, and they'd just go upstairs to sleep at night, right? And they'd have a kitchen and the TV. I'd sit there and I'd watch Popeye, in the basement. But when does that become a multifamily?
Well, first let me clarify,
Yeah.
okay? Under the New Jersey Municipal Land Use Law, 1 and 2 family houses are a separate category from 3 units or more. 3 units or more is a multifamily.
Okay.
2 units is not considered a multifamily. And a single family is obviously a single family.
Right. Okay.
But the big difference, and I think what you're getting at, is what is the difference between a one-family house and a two-family house?
Right, what's the difference, because I'm using the basement myself.
It has nothing to do with the people in the house. It has to do with the house itself.
Okay.
So there's a construct in real estate, and I've heard a lot of realtors use this term, a mother-daughter house. There is no such thing in municipal land use law. It's either a single-family house occupied by a multi-generational family, or it's a two-family house. But what determines that is the building itself. If there's a kitchen upstairs and a kitchen in the basement, and there's a separation between the basement unit and the upstairs unit, even if the people are related that use both, that's a two-family house. If you have a kitchen in the basement and you have a kitchen upstairs, and grandma is in the basement and she can walk up into the and visit with the family above, that's not a two-family house. That's a single family.
I'm sorry, what was that last thing you just said? Would you repeat that again?
If you have a kitchen in the basement and grandma lives in the basement, and you have a family living on the first floor, and they're related to each other, and grandma can walk up the stairs and visit with the family without having to go outside, that is not a two-family house.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay? So it's the building itself,
The way it's structured.
that the way the unit is divided, that's what tells you whether it's a one-family house or a two-family house. And then, of course, if you have 3 divided units, you have a multi-family situation.
Right, okay.
And they're all regulated by zoning. But the idea of a mother-daughter being a two-family house, that's an incorrect interpretation of what that means.
Okay.
But from what I understand, if you had a home and you had the ability to put your mother downstairs, you cannot now build that kitchen down there. Like, we can no longer put a kitchen over our garage or put a kitchen down in the basement, even if we were doing it just for our family.
Zoning regulations vary from municipality to municipality, but there's nothing in the building code that prevents you from doing that. It's not a building code issue. And I make the distinction between the building code, which is managed at the state level and is dictated to all the municipalities, it's uniform throughout the state, and the zoning codes, which are all individually crafted and individually enforced. So the zoning codes, and I deal in municipalities all over the state, very often the zoning they'll have restrictions on kitchens, they'll have restrictions on bathrooms even in the basement, or even in upper levels, or restrictions on how the building can be divided. That's a zoning restriction and not a building code restriction. The building code allows multi-generational families can live in large houses and they can have multiple kitchens, as long as they don't have a tenant division between the different living spaces.
So right now, when in Ridgewood, I would assume, I guess the single-family home is still what most people aspire. But we have all these apartment buildings which went up recently, 3 or 4, I guess. And what's the status with those? Rented? No.
They're rentals only. I know at the beginning of the discussion years and years ago, the boards at the time, the zoning boards or whoever was on there at the time, they were trying to, pursue them or try to get them to do like the 55 and over, because there has to be so many units that are a regular rental price range, and then so many units that have to be designated for either special needs, low income, and they kind of go together a little bit, and 55 and over. And we wanted, as real estate agents, we wanted the 55 and over, because what we see, we want the houses away from you guys so we can sell them. And but a lot of people want to stay in Ridgewood, and I like a community that has multi-generations, and because of our taxes, for one, we lose that a lot of times. You'll see a lot of times the graduation sign from RHS that says, "Congratulations, Susie," and then you see the for sale sign up the same exact year, because taxes are killing people. So we wanted that, and unfortunately all 4 units, I think the one that's the newest one at the end of Ridgewood Ave was the one who had initially thought that they would do it, but for the owners that involved, it wasn't going to make them. They knew the market, and it wasn't going to give them the prices that they want in the end.
Are they occupied?
They are.
Yeah.
100% occupied, and at I shouldn't say ridiculous, but at very, very high prices. So now even and I say older generation, but even myself, I've got one that's a sophomore that's out in 2 years. I want to stay in town. I work in town. I've got a big house that I don't want that mortgage anymore. And but for me, for a mortgage that's been around for a while, it's still under 3% or around 3%, and decent enough taxes to go from that to a 5. I think most of the the studios were between 4 and 5, and the 2 bedrooms were $5,000 and $6,000 a month. Is incredible, and for the even older generation, 60s, 70s, or whatever, it's easier for them to go somewhere else. Although it's harder everywhere now, but it's.
Are most of them aspire? I guess I shouldn't put those terms, but they want the one family home ultimately, or is it the young couple moving in? I'm just curious.
The young couple moving in wants the one family home. I think the retirees or the downsizers, what we miss on that, and I know we don't have the space in Ridgewood as we do in a couple other towns around us, but what would be nice would have been the high density homes, or what I would say the luxury condos. I would love to go a place where I had my workout in there, a pool maybe in there. Those are the attractive things that people go to the Carolinas for, to Florida for, when they're downsizing and retiring. But some people really do want to stick around if all their kids are working in the New York metro area, or they've started with grandkids already in the area. They want to stay, and we're limited on what we can give them. They're more or less happy now and are staying in their homes because it's too expensive to go elsewhere. Their houses are paid off, or what mortgage they have left is probably very, very low, and it's easier to stay there.
And if I can just follow up with what Pam is saying. So what's come to me as an architect are people calling and saying, they're empty nesters, they're living in their homes, and most of them in Cresskill splits or, multi-story homes, and they don't want to leave. And all of their kids are like on the West Coast, and they come to me and they're like, Simone, they're like, my son is allowed to put a dwelling unit in his yard that he can rent and earn an income. Can we do that here? And you don't know what to tell them, because basically, and I live at home with my mom, and she's a senior, and it's very, very hard to displace a senior from their home. They're so used to their home, and you take them out of their environment. Although it would be wonderful to have an all-inclusive community, a lot of them really don't want to leave their neighborhoods. And I know we know all of our neighbors on a first-name basis and can contact them. So there is a need I've seen in my own office for people that want to somehow convert their split level into one level home, or perhaps build an accessory structure where they can live, that's all in one level, and either rent the home to a caretaker or a son or a daughter. And it's a movement now that's happening, I think, because our empty nesters are becoming aware of this from their children who have moved to the West Coast and are seeing, these different types of lifestyles come up on their lots.
Yeah.
There's 2 good points here, if I could just
Go
jump
ahead.
in.
Yeah, sure.
Pam made an excellent point, and I just want to highlight it, is that when you have a municipality that has affordability of housing at every income level, it allows for the children of successful people to live in the town, separate from mom and dad, and what it does, that leads to long-term stability of a community. That will lead you to, generations of families staying. There are communities in Bergen County where the children of the parents cannot afford to live in the town. They have to leave. They have no choice. So the municipalities that have housing at every income level, those are the municipalities you're going to see that have long-term stability. And Ridgewood falls into that category. I can't emphasize that more. As a community planner, I'm an architect and a community planner, so I see this. One of the reasons I chose the town that I chose to live in was because I recognized that they had housing affordability at every income level. So you could have that long-term stability and the long-term just health of the town. And you wouldn't be subject to forcing your younger residents out because of affordability issues. That's very important. Simone raises another point that's very important as well. We have a lot of seniors that live in their homes, in some cases mortgage-free, or they have a small mortgage left. They do not want to leave their home. They love their home. They worked hard to get in that home. They want to stay in that home. But the property taxes are really hurting them a lot. And that's, as I mentioned before, that I'm hoping that maybe some innovative ideas, maybe like this Airbnb model or some other models, can be perfected in order to help that group in particular, so that they can remain in the home that they love and the home that they worked for. They deserve to be in that home. It's very hard for them to leave. They don't want to leave. And this may be a way. So those are two very good points, and I appreciate you bringing them up.
And you know what's sad about Ridgewood, I mean, all from different towns, but is, actually I should say Ridgewood and elsewhere, because I sell all over, is we're losing that that difference, because we're having those small Cape Cods are being blown out. The ranches, oh my gosh, so many people, and if I only knew, because I have a mother that I just put into assisted living, if I could have a ranch and have something easier for her, I would have her home with me. And they're being blown, they're being bought by, over market, and then a builder sticking them up. So we're losing those, those first time buyer type of, homes, unfortunately,
It's true.
So I have a it's not on here, but just my own personal experience. So I grew up in Southeast Bergen County. It doesn't matter where, right? But because I don't want to insult the town I grew up in. but it's just, there's not, and I defy you to go find a tree. The town has just been denuded, where 50 by 100 lots are now 4 family homes, etc. And I guess one of the things that concerned me when you started with multifamily was, is there a tipping point where you completely lose the character, of a village or a place where people are involved? Like, where I grew up has just become, a concrete jungle. And I'm not saying it was paradise, but, where do you draw that line, I guess? And I guess that's a personal question. Not personal, but I mean, it's an opinion question.
We are the most densely populated state.
Right.
That's right.
New Jersey, and that's the issue, is that not only have we overbuilt, but we haven't improved our infrastructure. So our roads are crowded, and you can't get anywhere without sitting in traffic, and it's getting worse and worse. I don't know. I mean, the housing has really gotten out of control, and I drive through Hackensack a lot, and when I see what's happening, and I don't know if those are rented. I mean,
yeah.
You talked about, maybe it's the town you grew up in.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're looking at the evolution of a municipality over many decades. Okay, I prefer to characterize it this way: the architecture of what you remember as a kid growing up naturally will change over time as people modify and improve the buildings and upgrade, even if they don't add density. But there is, there is usually in most municipalities, most mature municipalities, there is a need to add additional housing. If the housing that's added is added in a carefully measured way, it can be done without damaging the architectural appearance of the town. Now, you're still going to have adjustments, and you're still going to have changes. There's going to be some new buildings. There's going to be some old buildings that get fixed up. But if that process is managed properly, the town can remain healthy, viable, and able to accommodate its citizenry at all income levels without too much difficulty. Now, here's the key. The key to that process is the planning board's charge of developing the master plan and modifying that master plan over time. The New Jersey Municipal Land Use Law gives the power to create the master plan to the planning board, and as I said before, the mayor and council person are on the planning board. They're guiding the economic development of the town. This is part of that process, it's guiding the economic development. If the master plan is drafted with an eye towards what I would call reasonable redevelopment and reasonable growth, the architecture of the municipality can be retained even as things change. So it's really incumbent upon the elected officials and the planning board to create a really high quality master plan that the zoning board then uses to decide whether variances are appropriate on particular properties. So the planning board prepares that master plan, and the zoning board uses that master plan to make determinations about the appropriateness of zoning applications. Now, the applicants are required to make their own cases, but they make their case by citing the master plan. So a well-crafted master plan and a zoning board that's populated with experienced residents who understand the master plan is key to having that long-term stability in your community and accommodating the needs of all of your residents from the standpoint of having housing.
And I feel like some of our things that have gone through zoning, not that they make comments regarding the architectural part of it, but there is,
They'll question it,
yes,
even though they're not
yes,
supposed to.
yes, I've seen that before. But usually it's maybe, the fact that someone wants a variance on their front setback because they want a porch.
Right.
And we all love porches, but I've heard them say, no one around you has a porch.
Well, and ordinances might say no flat roofs
Yeah,
allowed,
yeah.
or there could be protective covenants written in to the district that you're working in. So there's ways to craft preserving that integrity that you're looking at not losing.
So you mentioned a couple of times, like towns, and maybe you don't want to say because I don't know whether you feel comfortable. Who you think has done it well?
Well, I'm not going to criticize any towns for the way they manage the process. I mean, elected officials are elected by the people who live in those municipalities.
Right.
So their job is to manage this process. So I give deference to them for managing the process within their own municipalities. So there are a lot of success stories in Bergen County. You can see that a lot of municipalities are now adopting changes that allow for more pedestrian access, friendlier for seniors who are walking around, friendlier for bikes, and moving away from dependence on the automobile. Bergen County is a unique setup in the sense that we are the most populous county of New Jersey, and New Jersey is the most heavily populated state in the country. So you see these new innovative ideas, not just from the internet, and the internet's also done a lot of damage, but these newer ideas about ways to live a healthier lifestyle and have people exercise and have these towns adapt. It's happening. It's happening slowly, and it's happening through that master planning process and through the zoning board and through the governing bodies. Because remember, the planning and zoning boards only have jurisdiction over the properties. What happens in the streets and in the parks, that's the mayor and council directly. So when you see plans drawn for a pedestrian access or changes made to a downtown to make it more friendly for bikes, that's all coming from the governing body, and that's the way it should work. But I see these changes happening all over Bergen County and all throughout New Jersey, and it
Well, sure.
it
Ridgewood,
works
I think
well.
Ridgewood is not completely unique, but I think I grew up in a town where you could walk places, right? There were sidewalks and whatnot. And Ridgewood is like that. At least theoretically, kids walk until they call you 10:30 at night to come pick you up. But anyway, while you're half asleep on the couch, but that's another story. But so I get that. I mean, I think it makes sense from a living. Not everybody wants that. Obviously, there are towns that people don't really want to know their neighbors. They're happy not to know their neighbors, and So I guess there's an element of that as well. But I do get your point. I think sidewalks make life a little easier. Just using that as an example, they do make life a little easier.
And there are, I can't even think of what is that. There's a town that actually, they have their sidewalk coming into the intersection. It not only gives you better crossing visibility, but it also narrows the roadway so that the cars travel more slowly. So there's lots of ways that you can craft the landscaping, so to say, amidst the built form
try to enhance. But I think walkability is something that really we should always take into account going forward, because the towns that don't have sidewalks, I think, do suffer by
Well,
people. Yeah.
I mean, that's an excellent point, and you know, the changes to intersections and such is part of these updated, more innovative techniques to make the communities more friendly for people beyond just the automobile. And there are some municipalities that are generally not friendly. They don't have sidewalk, not friendly to pedestrians or to bikes. They don't have the sidewalks. They tend to put larger homes on larger lots. You need your car to do anything.
Right.
But I'm finding that my clients, and I do a lot of private work, are expressing an interest in municipalities like Ridgewood, like Westwood. They're moving out of the municipalities that are not bike and pedestrian friendly. They want to be able to walk out their front door and walk into town at a reasonable distance, you know, a half mile, 3/4 of a mile,
Right.
mile, and you get healthy by the fact that you're walking. So these are now being considered desirable aspects, whereas 20 years ago, the house on the cul-de-sac with no sidewalks was the ultimate. It's not like that anymore. I mean, I have a neighbor, I live in Westwood, I have a neighbor who sold his house on the cul-de-sac in Upper Saddle River to move to Westwood, specifically because he wanted what Westwood had to offer. I'm a very big fan of Ridgewood. Ridgewood has a compact downtown. You can walk from one end of it to the other in a reasonable amount of time. You have a symbiosis of businesses. There's a lot of services. You see the retail's been hurt by the internet, but as time goes on and as master plans get updated, you'll see uses change. You want to have more service retail type uses, the types of uses that the internet can't hurt or can't damage, and that will be the future of the downtowns and the retails. But they're going to morph into more entertainment centers, physical fitness center. I mean, the streets themselves become the method by which people get healthy. And we see this all over. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yeah, well, that's been one of our latest Ridgewood fights or issues was during COVID, we shut down, you know, Main Street, Ridgewood Ave during the weekend. And it was one of the best thing, I think, for people ever. And unfortunately, they just took that away from us. They felt now we've moved on and we're back to normal. But I love that.
Oh, that's a shame.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it was.
that's
It was
something
such a shame. And
Maybe they should just try to continue it on Friday and Saturday evenings, right?
Yeah, but it, you know, it made it, and when you talk about, you know, which I love Wyckoff, I think they've got pockets of that, and then it's still kind of broad, but, you know, some towns, when people come out and can't necessarily afford, you know, Glen Rock and Ridgewood and the train towns that offer that kind of urban feel, then I say, well, Saddle River's got some great things, and Wyckoff, and you try to get them out to those areas where you get a lot more for your money and bigger pieces of land. And, you know, some will and some love it, but then everyone else pretty much wants, you know, they'll pay more to be in a town with the walkability and the train and the restaurants and all the good things.
Yeah, if your house is within half a mile of mass transit, such as the train line, and Ridgewood has a very beautiful active train station, that's going to be where you're going to want to be, because you can get anywhere without a car within a reasonable period of time. Plus you can walk around town. So you want to be close to the transit hubs and the rail lines. And Bergen County has a mature set of transit hubs. You have the Northern Valley has a railroad, although there's no commuting on that. They have the bus service. Then you have the Pascack Valley line comes up through Pascack Valley. Ridgewood has the train running in both directions. And there is mass transit that I think still needs to be improved some, but it gets better and better.
And I think some towns suffer by what other towns decide to do, like the Hudson-Bergen Rail, which has not come to Bergen yet. We don't have anything in Cresskill, and our bus service has been cut substantially, so it's very, very difficult to get into the city. I actually drive to West New York, hop on a jitney, and that's how I get into the city. So what had happened with the Bergen Light Rail is that it's supposed to be in the works. It was talked about and now has not been talked about, but then it was decided that it would stop in Englewood at Englewood Hospital. And then, what about Tenafly decided that they didn't want it, and we're like, well, Cresskill wants it. So, one town, it's really,
It's true.
it's so, we might have to do
A
that.
tunnel.
But,
like the big.
But,
dig in
and then there was
Boston.
there's the big movement with the, what do they call it, the Greenway. So, okay, well, we're not gonna get the Bergen Light Rail, so we'll make it a Greenway. But I personally think the Greenway is discriminating because who can use the Greenway? Bicyclists and active people. I think the seniors want that light rail so that they can move around. So there's gotta be both. There's gotta be not just a rails to trails, there's gotta be a rails with trails. There's gotta be more of a, kind of like what we're talking about, an open-mindedness to allow for this whole topic of the conversation tonight, which is this multi-generational way to kind of age in place, in your property, and try to keep people in our communities where they feel most comfortable.
So, would it be okay if some people ask
Sure.
questions? Anybody question or input? Yes, sir.
Could you just address the elephant in the room with the burdensome regulations coming from the state of New Jersey concerning affordable housing, and how if you're trying to do planning in town and suddenly you're faced with these thousands of affordable housing and trying to make it work and find that balance, how do you do that?
How do you do that?
Yes.
If you figure it out, let me know.
Yeah.
I will say this, that I do feel that as a society, as a state of New Jersey, that we do have an obligation to provide for people at every income level, okay? And that's really tough to do in a state where we have some of the highest property values and some of the highest taxes. So it doesn't surprise me that the politicians in Trenton, who are elected from this area also, are talking about regulations. Now, they've kicked it now over to the courts, and the courts are now evaluating the obligations. There needs to be a reasonable balance between the obligations of the municipalities and the need. And I think the state is still working through that. I think this is something that the whole state is grappling with. We here in Bergen County, probably more so, because we're the most populous county. We have the most people, and New Jersey being the most densely populated state. These issues are going to arise and become more acute in our county. So I think there's a ways to go yet. I don't know that the path forward is clear, but I do think that we have an obligation to try and accommodate affordability into all of our municipalities in a reasonable and a balanced fashion.
Well, reasonable is, and I'm a little bit more negative on this issue because I think the whole doctrine has been misconstrued through Trenton, through the legislators. And I've dealt with this in Cresskill, meeting our fair share housing requirement, which we have done. However, people that were mandating it never even had been to Cresskill. And they were telling us, dictating to us how many units we needed and where to put it, which would have been up on the hill, far away from everything, no public transportation, no means of walking. So I think and flooding the courts with this is, I think we need to go back to some sort of an agency that could help us with it, like you said, to meet our requirement, but it has to come from the local municipality. I've been fighting for this. I think Senator Schapese has been fighting for it too. I know there's a couple of mayors that are working on this as well, but it's unfortunately in the hands of lawyers that don't have any concept of what the repercussions of these mandates. And I don't really believe that anything should ever be mandated, but we are being forced, and the developers are taking it to their advantage because they're being allowed to build these monsters. And I think that's what happened in Ridgewood, because there's a set aside, because yeah, we can get 5 units out of this 90 unit rental, so we're going to take it. They're going to allow it. And sitting on the planning board, we've had to deal with that in Cresskill. We knew we had to allow something to go through because we were going to get 8 units of apartments. So, okay, well, we need to satisfy this, because you get into trouble by people that have absolutely no clue what it's like to live in our communities. And that's the part that's so bothersome about the Mount Laurel, what was supposed to have been a good doctrine. It's just been totally taken out of control.
I would agree with that. I live in Saddle River, and we have to build 210 low-income houses in our town. We don't have sidewalks. There's no public transportation in our town. How are these families going to get around? Every student in our school is driven to school by their parent. How are these kids going to get to school? And the development that they're letting them build has no sidewalks. So it's a danger to these kids. I'm an orthopedic surgeon. I know what happens when you get hit by a car. There's absolutely no thought process going into this. They're just telling you have to do it, and they don't care how you do it, but they're telling you to do it. And I am also on our planning board, so I'm very involved in this.
And telling you which areas, or is it?
Well, unfortunately, we have an intervener that came into our town. So now our 210 has turned into like 260 because he gets to build regular units as well.
They find the vacant land. So, you know, you think you might own your land, but you really don't. They'll find the land and tell you that you need to put this amount.
That's why when you made a comment that the states give you the regulation, whenever you said something about the states give you the home rule situation at the beginning of your discussion, but it's really not the truth. You come in and you're trying to dictate or look at how to use the land within your property, within your town, yet the state comes in and overrules you anyway.
They also make you change.
Because they're misconstruing a doctrine. That's the whole point, is that you see what I'm saying? They're taking something that should have been good, but they're misconstruing it to allow for all of this. And who's benefiting are the developers. They just get in there, then they sell it, and they're gone.
Right.
They don't live with it, and that's the issue.
I don't know if you would agree. I think there's an element of social engineering to it, right? In the sense that if we take people who are poor and we put them in this place, their lives are going to magically improve.
Well, there used to be.
And it probably doesn't work quite that way, but I think there's an
What was
element
it
of
called, Bill? We used to be able to give, in lieu of that, we used give funds to like
You could
Bayonne,
assign
New
your
Jersey City.
unit numbers.
Right, exactly.
That was a more regional
Where
approach.
people want to be.
Yeah, but to your comment, it's Tom, right?
Tom, yeah,
I'm sorry.
sure.
I hesitate to assign motives to the process. This is a complex problem. And I'm not sure, I mean, we have to kind of work through this solution together as a state. But Bergen County is probably going to be the one that's most affected first because of our population and because of the need and for more reasonably priced housing. Obviously, builders and the construction industry in general is motivated by profit, okay? In order to generate profit in construction, you have to build buildings. So you want to build buildings that have the highest possible sale price. So you're going to target your market in Bergen County, you're likely going to target your market at the luxury and high end because that's where you're going to get the biggest return on your investment. So the economics of that is not going to change. You're not going to have builders voluntarily coming in and building affordable housing without having some carrot and stick approach to getting them to do that because there's no profit in it for them. So that's why they have these regulations that, if you're building a condo building, your 20% of the units are set aside as affordable for sale. And if you're building a rental building, it's 15%. So it's essentially, 1 in 7. So what does that do? That immediately knocks out any condo construction at all, because a builder who's looking to maximize profit is also looking to minimize the number of affordable units in their project. So you have the market forces, the basic economics of a profit-driven industry, which is normal. I'm not, ascribing any negativity to that, but this is what happens. So, if you don't do anything over time, you are not going to be affordable at all. There isn't going to be any affordability in any of the communities. So, there needs to be a balance. There needs to be a regulatory balance. And I don't think all of it should be dictated directly from Trenton. I do think that there should be local home rule involvement, but it can't just be home rule and it can't just be Trenton. There's got to be some kind of a balance. Now, right now the courts are dealing with it, and they are trying to strike a balance, but nobody's happy. The affordable housing advocates are not happy with the courts, and the local municipalities are not happy with the courts. And that's why I said to you before, if you figure it out, let me know, because it's a very complex problem. And the same thing is happening with the idea of sustainable design and what do we do about the climate change, however you feel about it, because the construction industry is so initial cost focused. They're trying to build as profitable a building as they can for the least amount of money. So that drives you to code minimum requirements when you build. And I'm saying this as a construction official, building inspector, as well as an architect and a planner. So there has to be some type of a regulatory carrot and stick type of approach. Now, do we have it figured out yet? I'm not sure that as a society we have it all figured out yet, but we're getting a little closer. And it's getting closer as time goes on. In the meantime, I don't think anybody's going to be happy. The affordable housing advocates are going to feel that there's not enough. And the municipalities are going to feel that the burden is too great. By the way, I'm not ever leaving New Jersey. I love New Jersey. I love Bergen County. I grew up in Gloucester. We have incredible history here.
I think that's why we're so passionate about this issue, because we want to stay.
Yeah.
I love the beach. I love everything about New Jersey.
I'm hoping, and I'm optimistic actually, that there will be a solution that may not satisfy everyone, but will address the problem in a reasonable and a balanced manner.
Doesn't the regulatory scheme that encourages affordable housing run contrary to the goal you talked about before of trying to help seniors stay in their homes and keep property taxes low? If you got a lot more kids in the school system, that's driving property taxes, isn't it?
You're right, and this is why I said it's such a complex problem. So in order to address all of those aspects, there needs to be a balanced and reasonable approach so that you're not hurting seniors and you're not driving up taxes in the towns in order to accommodate what you need to accommodate in order to serve the needs of all levels of society.
Isn't the market the best mechanism for determining what that balance is?
The problem with that is that land is a finite resource. If we could manufacture land, I would agree with you 100%. But because land is a finite resource and a lot of real estate pricing is demand driven, it's not inventory driven, it's demand driven. If we lived in Ohio, you could just plow down a cornfield and build another subdivision. You could create more inventory because there's land to do so. We can't do that here. So it's not going to be a market-only solution. It has to be a balance between regulatory and market forces, and that balance may be different in different municipalities within the same county, and that balance will be different in between the counties throughout the state of New Jersey. So that, in general, everyone is working towards a balance, but the balance to me is not yet clear. But thank you for that question, because that's the big issue here. It's about land being a finite resource, and the market forces alone can't handle this, in my opinion.
Not here, maybe in Iowa.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
We're talking about Bergen County.
Right. That's
We're
what I'm
talking
saying.
about
Right.
Ridgewood.
That's what you say. Here it's right.
Yeah, I'm from Glen Rock, and we have a very exciting project going on now, arguably the largest project that's going to happen in the history of Glen Rock. You mentioned before about the differences between planning board and zoning board, and why it's good not to have government members on the zoning board, and you do have some government members on the planning board, no government members on the zoning board. So I'm part of a group that's really like challenging and with the mayor and council and the planning board, because this has gone to the planning board. Now, there's an overlay for residential on what's there now. And when there's a change of use, that should go into a zoning board, right? If there's a change,
Not a change of use, but if the use is not permitted in the zone.
okay,
Now, if you have an overlay zone, that use may not be permitted in the zone.
okay.
And part of the reason why overlay zones are used is so that the applications will be directed to the planning board, because what's happening is the governing body, by use of overlay zones, is guiding the economic development of the future of the municipality. So that's entirely appropriate.
And that's what they did. They did it in Cresskill too. They took a lot of the commercial industrial areas and made them overlay zones to allow for future housing because of what our
Yeah.
obligations were.
Yeah, I just want to talk about this for a minute because I was also a member of the planning board in Glen Rock for a long time and worked on co-authored master plans.
So you understand how important that process is?
Yes, and we have an opportunity, and I think the planning board has an obligation to not just plan for what's happening today. And I've had this argument with the mayor, I've talked to her with her several times, that you should be planning for 2050 Glen Rock and 2075 Glen Rock. And our group is,
Remember, this is an open public process. The planning process in the community is open. You can attend the meetings. You know this because you were on the planning board. You have local knowledge that's very valuable. I'm assuming that you're attending the meetings and expressing your opinion and giving these ideas.
yes, we're doing our best. We're still in Zoom in Glen Rock.
Okay. All right, but regardless of the format of the meetings, I would encourage you to go back to the master plan that you helped create. Refamiliarize yourself with it, because the master plan is supposed to be a forward-looking document. There should be language in there that talks about the future of Glen Rock. And you need to point out those features in the master plan to the planning board as they are reviewing this application. You also should be pointing it out to your governing body. Remind them that the master plan that was created by your planning board is there as a resource for them as well. And like I said before, I don't like to ascribe motivations of any kind. Everybody's trying to do as best that they can within the framework of the law in the most populous county in the state, in the most densely populated state in the country. So, I'm optimistic that we can get there. If we have citizenry that participate, that aren't on the board, maybe you get reappointed to the board, I don't know, maybe not, but your participation at the meetings and citing the documents that the municipality is supposed to be using to guide the course of development in the course of the future could be very effective. You're only one person, but you could seem like a lot more if you use those documents and point these things out.
We do have a group in Glen Rock of 6 or 7 of us working to bring this to light with the planning board, our concerns. The world has gotten much more political. That's also become more of the problem. So we're concerned that meant some of the planning board's members just don't have the experience, and they're streamlining, and they're a little bit bullied by the attorney and the developer. So it almost comes off as if they're more concerned what the developer wants than doing what's best for the residents of Glen Rock.
You want to have a symbiosis in your commercial areas. You don't want them to close up at 5 o'clock and have it be deserted. So having a certain amount of reasonably conceived, balanced in terms of cost, housing in your downtown area is, in my opinion, extremely important for the long-term stability, for the future of the municipality. I'm also a huge fan of Glen Rock because I love the fact that you have the 2 rail lines, and that is my favorite rock. The rock at Weirmus and the rock at Glen Rock, that is just the most amazing thing.
You know what? There's something romantic about it. 2 sets of tracks, and you hear the freight train come down, There's nothing romantic about it when you have to get across town and pick up.
Yes,
your kid.
yes,
No.
exactly.
You're right.
I mean, but there is though, there's something nice and nostalgic about it. I grew up in Fairlawn, 150 feet away from the tracks, and I remember as a kid just counting the cards going across the ceiling with the light coming through, and 120, 121, 122. So there was something romantic about it, and the house would rumble a little bit. But I just see like this as, and you can't do something like this immediately, because people wouldn't be able to comprehend it, and they wouldn't want, they think that's crazy. That's why
You
it's
need
got.
reasonable redevelopment and a balanced approach over a time frame.
Exactly, and Bill, I think that's why this has to be looked at as a 50-year plan. That's why you have to look at planning for today, 25 years out, and 50 years out, because people aren't gonna digest it all in one, it has to be in steps.
You're right, but it's hard to do that because society changes dramatically over that time period. I mean, look, 50 years ago, everything was automobile focused.
Yes.
Every developer wanted a new subdivision in Bergen County with no sidewalks. They wanted everything automobile focused, and the entirety of society was focused on that. Now we're moving away from that. So you're looking at a 50-year period, but you see a dramatic change. You see a dramatic change in younger people. You know, they refer to them generally as millennials. A lot of them have no interest in home ownership. A lot of them have no interest in buying vehicles. And you're going to see a dramatic change. You see the Lyft and Uber services coming into play. That's going to start to affect land use because it's going to start to distort some of the parking calculations that are built into the zoning. You're also going to see autonomous vehicles because a lot of these millennials don't have driver's licenses. So it's not just going to be Uber and Lyft. There's going to be vehicles available for them to call on through their phones that don't have drivers in them. And this will ultimately, I believe, reduce traffic eventually. In the meantime, it's going to increase traffic a bit, but there's a lot of moving parts here. And I think everybody's got the right idea for different reasons, and there needs to be balance, and there needs to be a reasonable approach. And we're getting there. It's just going to take time.
But what you're saying is very true, because the technology is always changing. Maybe in 50 years, Glen Rock won't be so romantic. Both sets of tracks will be gone.
No, listen,
We'll be hybrid, whatever.
Yeah, hovercraft. I can really
Hovercrafting.
relate to what you said about the railroad because I grew up in Closter, about a half mile away from the freight line that runs along the Ordell Reservoir. And I remember very clearly being 7 or 8 years old in the summers when we had the windows open because we didn't have air conditioning. And at 5 a.m., you roll over in your sleep as a kid, and I could hear the freight train a half mile away, clickety-clack, clickety-clack, clickety-clack. And even now in my mind, I remember that like it was yesterday. And there's so many beautiful experiences about Bergen County and living here and having your children be able to continue to live here. That, these are problems that I think are solvable. It's going to take some time.
Yeah, it's just important to lay the right foundation. You want to get the right foundation down. Thank you.
The man in blue.
So I have a question for you, which is going to change the subject a little bit about how do you see assisted living residences, nursing homes, or other things coming into communities? I'm from Mahwah, I'm on the zoning board, which is not in our zone plan, so everything appears in front of the zoning board for our use. And it's become an issue, as I understand, across most of the towns in Bergen County. I know if you don't approve it, you're getting sued. And how are those demographics, how are those things changing? And then in some cases, the residential credits can be used if you have assisted living for affordable housing. So what are your thoughts on those things? How are they affecting what you're seeing as future planning and other type of things in each of these towns?
I think actually, I know planning boards and zoning boards, and I think we talked about this briefly. We have to make sure the right people get appointed to these boards because you have to be able to say no. And I think that's the detriment that's happening a lot that I see. People are afraid to say no because they're afraid we're going to get sued. The planning board's going to get sued. We're going to, and so be it. But we really need to get the right people on these boards, and I think that would be half the battle. You can't be afraid to speak up and vote no for an application that you know is going to be detrimental to the community. And unfortunately, you know, there's always talk saying, oh, you know, we gotta get this through because we gotta, so it's gonna be a struggle.
And do you feel that assisted living is detrimental to community? Is that what made you?
I think it
That
depends on
question.
where you put it. If
Yeah,
you
yeah.
Depending on where you
came
put it,
to
yeah.
downtown Ridgewood and said, I wanna be right near the train line in Glen Rock, and I'm gonna take that and put a 4-story building in, and I don't care if you like it, but this is how many units we're gonna have, and I have this assisted living, and it's gonna be for 50 and up, a very active community, but I still want people to be able to go to work and come home and blah, 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 blah.
Right.
You get into a whole other kind of genre of discussion and battle on housing. And I think it depends on where you put it, why you want it in that certain location. But in some cases, these firms are coming in right in the middle of a residential area where there happens to be bordering, commercial or overlap and putting it in, and whether you like it or not, it's going in. And I think that you do have to have very intelligent people on the board. I've been on 2 different towns, 2 different zoning boards over the years, and I'm not afraid to challenge, and I'm not afraid to say no. And there's usually always compromise, but at the same time, you do have to be able to say no, and you have to have a good town planning and good town engineer and be able to raise those questions. But how do you see that affecting other towns?
You need,
They're trying to put it in places where they should be put.
well, if you're gonna say no, you need to have solid reasoning
Yeah, you have to
behind
back
it.
up everything.
And you're gonna get that solid reasoning in your master plan. So my advice to you is to seek an update, or re-examination of the master plan to address the changing development conditions, because there's a need in the community.
That's exactly what we did.
There's a need, okay.
And we threw it back out of the most recent applicant took it out of the zoning after about a year of hearings, very complicated application, and went back to the mayor and council. Because the real issue is the actual use of the site could be built just the way they wanted to without assisted living. And they could put apartments in it, and the density, and they could do a number of things. When I raised questions and others raised questions, said, but if a nursing home or assisted living was in our zone plan, you wouldn't be in front of us. That's correct. Lawyer figured it out, went back and made a compromise with the mayor and council, going back, re-examining the zone plan. We have the ability to go do that. A lot of other towns don't, so I was just kind of curious about, is there an effect? I know it happened in Franklin Lakes, I know it happened in Montvale, where they've been challenged. But you know, you have the Sika test, and if it's good for the public, the benefit of the public, you do have to make sure your negative criteria is far going to outweigh any of that beneficial. That's very, very hard to do.
Right, but if
And
you have
most judges will not approve.
if you have a well-crafted master plan,
Exactly.
you have the best chance of getting a reasonable and balanced result.
And in the master plan, we were smart, we put it into locations or get approval for locations where if you go up to the Sheraton, there's open land up in there. Plenty of land there, putting it right in the middle of the downtown, where it's right across from where the old post office used to be on Franklin Turnpike. It's a very small density, you're trying to make it very dense. It's not a good location. It's gonna go there, but the point being is putting it in the master plan is exactly the point. You've got to put it where you want it, then you can deny the use because you've allowed for it elsewhere. We were in the difficult position because it wasn't approved in the master plan. So it's not in the master plan, therefore anybody can put whatever they want, wherever they want, and challenge you. And that's very difficult, it's that fine line between Saturday night and Sunday morning.
This is why I advocate for municipalities to update their master plans often.
Yep.
It used to be required every 6 years. The legislature extended that to 10 years. 10 years is a lifetime. I advise, I live in Westwood. I have, as a member of the planning board, been advocating for updating of the master plan on a regular basis every 3 years to 5 years. Now, it's not an inexpensive process, but if you do it right, you won't get sued.
But I think to the point is, it's gotta be iterative. Every 3 to 5 years, if not, it still has to be under interpretation, to your point. if you're not interpreting from the next 3 to 5, next 3 to 5, next 3 to 10. And I think that's your point.
Yeah, but you don't have to
Iteratively,
re-examine the entire master plan every 3 years. But if you have a particular issue in your municipality, your planning board exists to address these matters. So if there's an issue arising, let the planning board discuss it. It's open to the public. Public can come in. If a developer owns a piece of land and he's curious as to what you're going to do to change, what's allowed on that land, he can attend and express, his opinion as a stakeholder. I mean, the applicants have rights, the property owners have rights, the citizens have rights, the municipality has rights. So it's, like I said before, balanced and reasonable is really what you're shooting for. And, I want to say everybody will be happy in the end, but it's more than likely that no one's going to be entirely happy, but that may be your balance and, your reasonable redevelopment or your reasonable development to address whatever issues are arising in your municipality. And I'm optimistic. I think the system works very well. It really does.
You make a good point. The balance is going to be what the compromises were between, but it should have never ended up in our opinion, in front of the zoning board, if the town had looked at the master plan, which had not done for a number of years. This is a growing need and concern across the United States, and it's definitely growing in a very densely populated area like Bergen County or northern New Jersey. So I think the master plan should have been addressed, because then it would have never come in front of us. It would have already been addressed, and the people coming into the town, buying up this land to do this, wouldn't have wasted their time there. They would have went elsewhere within the town, or made or come down Ridgewood where we're trying to sometimes.
And the growth is huge, like coming from someone that to me, it's not a business issue, this is a personal issue, because I looked forever, and Paramus, who has just multiple, along Paramus Road and that way, and we ended up in Wayne, but to see them pop up and go in there and just...
There's a growing demand and growing need, and they're coming to every town and every location. And I don't think anyone wants to fight that, but where they go, to your point, on the master plan should be addressed well ahead. And if towns aren't looking at that now, they should.
They weren't thinking, yeah.
Second question I had is around group homes.
Some things you still miss, Glen Rock is mostly developed, so it's almost something that you didn't really even think you needed.
Well, no one has a perfect crystal ball.
Yeah, exactly.
But
Exactly.
if the master plan is well conceived, it will guide you
Yes.
through these approval applications, or these applications for whatever they are. They're not always about housing, sometimes they're about commercial development, but right now we're dealing mostly with housing issues. But the master plan is very important for helping to guide you. And then, of course, the decision you make, whatever it is, whether to approve or deny, you're basing your decision on what's in the master plan. So you're documenting your decision, and you're making a rational and reasonable argument, and you're making a well-balanced, thought-out decision. That's going to be given some weight. It's not arbitrary. It's not, I don't want you in my town. It's not, we don't want multifamily. We want this. It's not any of those things that are not consistent with the planning process. So, did you know?
Yeah, when I moved into Ridgewood, I have to tell, this is my age, it was a sleepy town.
Right, yeah.
It had a Friendly's, it had, I think it was a Woolworths, it had a
right.
dive bar, I can't remember the name of it, but it was great. It had a long, narrow bar, ice cream stand across from the duck pond. Yeah, long time ago. But in the 90s, I had to move my mother. My mother lived out on Long Island. I grew up on Long Island. And my father was ill. We lived on a ranch, but it was on a hill. So you had to drive up the driveway. You had to walk up a flight of stairs to get into the house. And he ended up in a wheelchair. So, and he stopped working. So we were selling the house, looking for a place for my mother to move. I was the only one with kids at the time, only one with a house. I wanted her to move into Bergen County. Nothing. I could find nothing for her. There was no 55 plus that would give her help on her taxes. There was nothing that would enable her to live on one floor. Everything, I worked so hard, and she ended up moving out to Stony Brook, further away from me. And I have to say, there's a great need for that. You know,
That was the 90s.
What?
If you think about it, in the 90s, that, you know, so long.
Yeah, that was so long ago. There was nothing, and there still is nothing. I tried, when I moved her here, she was there, and my father passed, and dementia was starting, and we had arguments about, you know, I'm not moving to you, you're moving here. And I had to find her another place, and I ended up putting her in an independent living because I could not find an apartment near me that was safe for her. That she'd be on one level, that I could conveniently get her groceries for her and stuff. There's nothing.
Do you think now there's more opportunities to?
No.
So
I
now
mean, I
there's-
haven't looked for apartments, but I doubt it. You have first of all, the apartments that I found were hard to get in and out of for her. And if they were a one-bedroom apartment, they had a tub, not a shower.
Right. Yeah, they're not, and again,
There's
I think it's just
nothing.
the approval that we just gave, planning board just gave in Cresco, there's a huge flight of stairs to climb. I mean, what are they talking about? Is this supposed to be for, all-inclusive type people? It's just so, it's so upsetting. And then after COVID, you'd think the developer might come back and put some open space into the project. Nothing's changed. And again, just forcing it on communities just to build this housing.
Well, one thing you brought up, one thing you did see was, you probably, if you're a real estate development, I mean, just people fleeing areas that had no development. It was a staggering number of people who left New York City, at least temporarily. It was hundreds, and mostly it was the wealthier people who left the city, who had whether they left permanently or not is another issue, but to flee because there was no place for them to go. Parks were they weren't, and just get to places where there's some place where you could go for a walk or have a backyard, and
I know you mentioned this. I'm just going to jump to this. You mentioned for something for closing remarks. I think that's the whole thing. We forget so easily, and it's so important for us not to forget what we've experienced and what we learned from COVID and what we see from our parents and I'm very lucky because I built a ranch only because my father insisted I build the smallest house that I could, not to pay high property taxes, and that happened to be the prototype of a ranch. And now it's wonderful because my mom can live there safely and having ease. But I think you mentioned group homes. So group homes are something that it's kind of like if you build it, they will come. We built one in Cresco. I never realized how many young adults in my own hometown have developmental disabilities that their parents came to us. They said, if something happens to us, who's going to take care of my son? These are not kids. These are people that are in their 30s and 40s and 50s. So there's a tremendous need. And those prototypes are great because they are one level. They're within walking distance of our supermarkets and our libraries where most of these adults have gotten employment. So I think that's kind of the silver lining behind a lot of this housing stock that's coming to us. We might not be seeing accessory dwelling units, but we are seeing more housing for our developmentally disabled adults and hopefully more for our seniors, because I do agree. And if they're way out in the boondocks and you can't even
that's
get
where
to
my mother
them.
ended up all the way out in Stony Brook,
But I think we have to take it upon ourselves to try to push and advocate for these types of prototypes